I'm Matt Hunkler, CEO and co-founder of Powder Keg, and on the show today, CEO and co-founder of Indy Maven and Maven Space, Leslie Bailey.
My column was The Adventurous. So I did the two-seater with Mario Andretti. I did a two-seater on a MotoGP bike.
Wow.
I went swimming with the dolphins at the zoo. I've flown 3 different types of planes. Christmas caroling at the mall. It was.
Did you sing?
I did.
Leslie Bailey has built an incredible community for people who want to uplift women's voices, Indy Maven. And after launching Indy Maven, she and her team built Maven Space, a co-working space, social club, and event venue in downtown Indianapolis. Leslie was raised outside of Detroit, Michigan, where her mother was a hairstylist and her father worked in the auto racing industry for over 60 years. Throughout her entire childhood and adolescence, both of her parents battled cancer, which has had a big impact on how Leslie approaches life. She has been a writer throughout her professional career, working the Saturday Evening Post, Indianapolis Star, Indianapolis Monthly, and a Triple A Crossroads Magazine before starting at Indy Maven in 2019. In our conversation with Leslie, we'll cover tips for telling a great story, the importance of prioritizing your mental health, characteristics of a strong community, and be sure to listen to the end where Leslie tells us about an amenity people are going crazy for when they are co-working at Maven Space. That's all coming up on this episode of Get In.
Not to be such a bummer, most of my childhood was like marked by my parents being sick. My dad got prostate cancer when I was in kindergarten. And then from that point on up till high school, one or both of my parents had cancer or something as a residual effect. So that was kind of the big marker. So I have a younger brother. He works here in Speedway now. He owns a carbon fiber shop. And I think just like I grew up really fast. We didn't have a huge community around us. So I took on like the bossy older sister role anyway. And then on top of that, like, again, just kind of having to grow up really fast.
Did you know at the time that wasn't like a normal thing to have to go through?
Yes, but I don't think I knew just like how extreme it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, I certainly didn't have, and my parents were also both older than most of the other parents. So their friends were actually already grandparents. Yeah. So when I would go over to their houses, it's like maybe their grandkids around, but there weren't like other kids to play with a lot our age. So that was good because I had my brother. And I definitely knew that like not everybody else is, my mom was going through shaving her head, giant scar on her head, chemo, radiation. I couldn't, like, even just down to like my high school friend couldn't wear perfume in the house because my mom couldn't, and we get kind of, there's all the different emotions, like get resentful and embarrassed because you're a kid, like you don't know how to process these things. Right? Terrified also. I mean, there's just run the gamut on emotions. So
sure.
I've been in therapy since I was 14 years old. I think everyone should do it. I still do it monthly.
Amazing that you got into therapy that early.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
And it's funny. I was always like my own advocate. Like that was my idea. Like I decided I should probably go to therapy.
Where do you think that came from?
I don't know. My mom, that was kind of like my mom. She's very determined, get an idea and made it happen. So I think that probably came from her.
What were some of those things that you learned going to therapy from the age of 14? I don't mean catch us up on all of your therapy since 14.
No,
but
it was kind of timely because I also was a victim of sexual assault by like a family friend who also became my employer. So there was a lot of that. So it was probably,
gosh.
That happened around that same time. So there was just a lot going on. And like, thank goodness that I had that in place.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because I think that helped me get through a lot of stuff that I was way too young that I should not have had to face, for a number of reasons. And I think that was probably had a huge factor in what saved me, but also like I had really good parents. So that helped.
What do you think helps to overcome those types of things? Is it, there's like actual terms, I think, but the survival mode or survival kicks in. But like everybody's built differently, right? And so what do you think it was that helped you overcome those things to focus on a future versus withdrawing?
I think that's like a nature versus nurture question.
Yeah, nature versus nurture.
I mean, so my answer to my superpower is resilience, but I don't know if that was like a result or if that was innate, right? Was that built in or did that just come about or was it a combination of both? So I don't know, but I definitely now as an adult have looked back and having my mom as the role, like the model, I wouldn't even say role model, but the person showing me this is how you handle these things. I mean, I'm so thankful that if I had to go through that with a parent, that I went through it with a parent who was so positive and was like, dying is not an option. And we're going to go to the comedy club. No, I didn't, but my parents went to the comedy club every week after her radiation session and like just celebrated. And I think just handled it in such a healthy way. I think that number one, that was one of the reasons she lived as long as she did. And then I think number two, that probably formed a lot of me now today. But it takes getting to your late 30s to see that. I certainly did not see that at 16.
So going back to that, right? I had a similar story where my mom battled cancer all through high school, ended up passing away in college. And now when I look back on it, it did seem like that was just our life. And like using those experiences as you look back on those as like motivation, and in the moment it's like a terrible experience, but how have you been able to pull lessons of resilience? And when did you officially realize that, like, though that it might be difficult and you look back and it's very, very hard, like how did you take that in a positive stride and it become formative to your entrepreneurship journey, to just your life in general today?
I think it first clicked for me. I went to IUPUI and I was working on a project with my communications professor. It was a women's studies project, and we interviewed, I think each of us did 7 women and out of this team. And my mom was one of them. And that was the first time that I actually sat down and asked her questions about her life, like before me and then after me and during, and what was that like? And I have it recorded, and I've never gone back and listened to it. Wow. I have it on my computer, and I kind of mostly just kind of forget about that it's there. I needed to make sure that I go back and find it. I know I saved it, but that was the first moment where I was like, oh, you were a whole person that had nothing to do with me, and then hearing all of those experiences reflected back just as another woman, not as my mom. So it was able to like take it out of context a little bit and then reformulate how it processed through me was the first experience where I recognized that. And then I think later is becoming when I became a parent. And then now I'm looking at it on the flip side from that perspective too. So it took time and then different experiences, me playing different roles to look back and then like just process it in a different way. And at the same time, it's awful. My mom passed away when I was a couple months pregnant with my first son. Right? It was horrible, but I got her 25 years longer than she was supposed to be here. And, I learned so much. And so yes, those were horrible moments, but I also am very well aware that have shaped me to who I am today. So you can't not be grateful for that.
That's commendable, right? The fact that you can take that in stride and turn what the average world would look at and see as a negative and a limiting factor and turn that into, being able to pull out the positive and be optimistic through that. That's very impressive.
Thanks.
Yeah.
We'll credit the therapy for that.
Yeah, I would imagine that therapy was extremely helpful, and having that just kind of observation on your life through all of those trials and tribulations were really important. And it sounds like those early experiences, all the way from dealing with those traumas to talking to your mom as a whole person, that a lot of those things led you towards a life of journalism. As you kind of look back, how do you think those things played a role in you choosing that path in your career?
Well, I always liked writing and storytelling.
What do you like about it?
Really going back, I think that was a way probably to process, like journal, right? Before that was a thing we told people. I think I figured that out pretty early, that I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed storytelling. I liked that part of it. And then later, as an adult, I don't know that I know I did not set out to become a journalist, but I think my approach was like process of elimination and figure out what you don't want to do. And I was lucky that it didn't take me that long to stumble into something I did, because that could have taken a while. But
what were some of the things you didn't want to do?
I interned at a radio station, and that was fun, but I realized I did not want to be on the radio.
Well, thanks for being on this podcast episode, despite not liking it.
A bit different. Like the pop culture morning drive time thing was not for me.
That's fair.
I worked in racing for a bit, in hospitality, and those are really long days. And I mean, I'm glad, again, thankful for that experience, but I did not want the life that my dad had in racing, just being gone and being on the road and just that culture. So
And you
I
said
didn't want to do that.
founded Indy Lights.
He did.
Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. In the 80s.
What was Indy Lights for those that weren't around here in the 80s?
So Indy Lights is a feeder series.
Okay.
So essentially like a lot of the big guy names that you see now in
Cool.
IndyCar. So Tony
Yeah,
Kanaan,
okay.
Scott Dixon,
Yeah.
Elio Castroneves, they all came up through Indy Lights.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is still around,
Yeah.
just the evolution. But yeah, so he and a man by the name of Pat Patrick, who was a team owner among many other things, founded that together in the 80s. And my dad
I had a
is...
friend that raced in Indy Lights.
Oh, did you?
That's
Who was
cool.
it?
Mark Olson. He raced around 10 years ago-ish, maybe.
Yeah, that's probably around the time my dad retired and I sort of got out of the whole scene too. But he actually he's 81 and he's the commissioner in the IMSA Sport Car Series. So he still dabbles.
Thanks for filling in the gaps for me. As these two guys know, sports is my kryptonite. I know nothing about sports other than how to play a couple of them,
Yeah.
and not very well. So,
He's pretty good at basketball. I've seen that.
yeah. But
Well, when you're 6'10",
I'll go with 6'10". Now that it's on the record, people will think that I'm actually 6'10". I'll take it. So you found out what you didn't want to do, and that kind of led you in that path. I had a question for you about your journaling practice. Has that evolved over the years?
I just got back into it this January 1st because I bought a 1 line a day journal, which I had already had once before. I probably could have gone and found that one in my basement and just used it, but I wanted a fresh start because my being maybe a little bit of an overachiever too, I need to do it every day and I don't have time and I've got this whole busy life. And so I that clicked, that's something manageable because I also want to just track things. Right.
Yeah.
And so now I'm doing that. I think because of I think you have to look at the season of life that you're in. And, there was a time where I had all the time in the world to just journal my thoughts and let them flow freely. And I didn't have to be anywhere. No one's going to interrupt me. That's not the season I'm in. I would love to get back to that someday,
Sure.
but with 2 little kids, probably not. So for now, it's the 1 line a day journal. And that has been great.
That's awesome. Yeah. We'll link it up in the show notes.
Yeah,
For
I
those
might
that-
go check that out too. 'Cause
Yeah.
I've always wanted to journal, but it's too intimidating.
This is super easy.
And that sounds great.
I was reminded of it by a podcast I was listening to that I love called The Lazy Genius. And I was sitting out front of Silver in the City. And I was like, I forgot about that thing. I bet Silver in the City has it. And I walked in and they had it.
That totally sounds like
And I
something
was
Silver
very
in the
certain.
City.
Yeah.
That's
They had a
awesome.
whole journaling section, but yeah.
Well, if Silver in the City has it, that's the one we'll link up in the show notes
Yeah.
so
Is
we
it
can
bad
support
that I've
local.
never heard of Silver in the City?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even I've heard of Silver in the City.
Oops.
It's great. They have 2 locations, one on Mass Ave and the other one up in
I'm going to
Carnal.
go check it out.
All your gift giving needs.
Bam.
We got to get one up in Zionsville for you, Toph.
I love it. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Or next time we're down at Burnside Inn, we can go
Hop
up,
over.
go up the
Yeah, do a
go-
little shopping.
Yeah, exactly. I love that, and I'm very privileged in the sense that I am able to devote 10 minutes a day to my journaling practice, and so it's nice to know that there are solutions for when I'm not in the season of life where I can peel away for 10 minutes
Yeah.
every day and do that.
Little
And
less pressure.
I can totally relate to the pressure of type A, wanting to make sure you get the gold star every day for doing journaling.
Yeah, there have been 2 days that I missed and definitely went back the next morning and was like, I'm not skipping it. I remember what I did yesterday.
Oh, that counts.
Yeah.
That counts.
That counts.
That counts. Definitely counts.
Yeah.
Well, what were your early experiences in journalism?
Well, like I said, it was very accidental. I met these guys on the street in Broad Ripple and I was going out all the time. And one of them was working at this free magazine called Metro Mix back in the
Yeah.
day, the free stands that you get at the corner of the newspaper. And he was like, would you be interested in writing about this? You should have a blog. And I didn't know what a blog was. So I looked that up. And I
About
was like,
what year was
okay.
this?
2006,
Okay.
maybe somewhere in that range.
Do you remember what bar you were coming out of?
All of them?
That's usually
The
how
Alley
Bar
Cat.
works. Yeah.
Any of Rob Sabatini's establishments
Uh-huh.
probably was my typical hangout. But became friends with this guy and he Joey Fingers and he worked at Metro Mix and yeah, and that just that kicked off. I started a blog. That led to writing for Metro Mix, which led to a column for Metro Mix, which led to some freelance articles for the Star, which led to my column in the Star. It just snowballed.
And was that all about like local culture?
I was officially the things to do reporter once I became a columnist at the Star. And then so I got this hybrid, which was, I was very lucky to have a sort of, I covered things to do in the city, you know, events, places to go, things to eat, right?
Share a couple of those stories, because I've heard some really good ones from when you were the things to do.
So then my column was The Adventurous.
Yes.
So that is where I got to go out. And so I did the 2-seater with Mario Andretti. I did a 2-seater on a MotoGP bike. I went swimming with the dolphins at the zoo. I've flown 3 different types of planes, glider, World War II plane, Christmas caroling at the mall. It was.
Did you sing?
I did. It just keeps coming back to this.
Did you sing your karaoke song?
I did not. No, it was Christmas carols. So it was. I was so lucky. That was such a fun job.
Yeah.
I left to take care of my mom when she got sick one of the times, and then I went after she kind of got better-ish. I felt good, and I was driving back and forth, right, to Michigan to here. And so then I thought, well, I've been at the Star, like maybe my time there has ended. And so I had been freelancing for Indy Monthly for a long time, and they were looking for a lifestyle editor. So I took that until my mom later got sick again. I got married and I left, and then, you know.
Well, and I want to come back to the decision to leave the different jobs that you were at. But first, want to kind of just rewind to those first couple of years in journalism, or at least those first, I don't know, dozen stories or so. What is it that clicked with you about storytelling? Why do you think storytelling is important?
I think this is going to sound cheesy, but I think it gives, like, you have this cool opportunity to give people a voice that maybe don't otherwise have it. And I think specifically, I always tried really hard to focus on local businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. Like, that was kind of on my radar before that was the thing to do.
Right.
Because that's what I was interested in. So I think my maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome that I had not being a actual, like, I did not go to school for journalism. I was a communications major. I think being the person and, you know, one of the few, if only, I don't know, everyone that I knew in that newsroom had a journalism degree. So I was like, well, I can't beat them, join them, you know, kind of thing. Like, I'll do it a different way. And it took the pressure off, like the few times that I had to kind of do like a harder hit, you know, I was like, this isn't what I want to do. There are so many other people in this room who are better at this than I am. So, like, let me stay in my lane. Because if you're, number one, enjoying what you do and it naturally comes easy, then why do something else anyway? So I guess just, I don't know, it clicked right away. I also maybe was naive and just, you know, maybe I didn't grow up here. So Indianapolis Star was not like a total household name. I mean, I knew it was the news. I understood what it was.
Sure.
It just, I don't know. I think this has been a lot of things for me where I don't overthink a lot, actually. I go off a lot of intuition.
People love that authenticity.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so you're very authentic, true to yourself, and that produces something that's amazingly different.
Thanks. Yeah.
How'd that change it? So you went from opportunity to opportunity in journalism. So how'd that change? So you were doing things to do, adventurism, and then as you progressed through that journey, how did that change? Did you cover different topics or things, or kind of the same at each stop?
Well, at the Star, again, I was so fortunate. So I got to write about personal things too. I wrote about mental health, just things that I had gone through. I wrote a column about my friend who died because he was waiting on a heart, and I got to talk to, you know, I got this amazing response from organ donors and his family and other organ donor families. So, I mean, I was really given a lot of freedom and autonomy in that role, which I'm so thankful for, and was kind of like different for them, right? And I applaud them for being open to doing something that wasn't as traditional. They were just sort of getting into this concept of journalists as personalities too. So I was in this like first test group of,
remember when Ann Landers was big?
Yeah.
Back in the day.
Yes. Well, but I think that's why that timing allowed for a little bit more flexibility and freedom in what I was doing. Indy Monthly, kind of more like as they had always done things, but still loved it. And I always loved the kind of like shopping, restaurant, lifestyle scene. So it wasn't a stretch for me either. And I had wanted to learn more about the process and the publication of the magazine that I had been freelancing for a long time. Because, being in the newsroom, I got to see how the sausage was made, and I didn't know so much there. So I'm glad I got to have that experience too.
So going into that, right, seeing how the sausage is made, the publication side, what skills outside of writing did you learn over your 10 plus year career in journalism that have helped you as an entrepreneur today?
Oh gosh. Well, kind of talking to that point about becoming the personality. So I got put on TV and I got put on the radio, and I was doing radio commercials. Actually, I forgot to write a guy back, but the other day one of the salespeople was like, "Hey, I found this radio spot you did," and I sound like a baby. And at the end, I did this little jealous. Like, I remember they had me rehearse these things, and that's all I could hear. But it was basically saying, I have such a cool job, and I did. But we partnered with the Colts. We did this like hybrid sports show where I would like go on with some of the players, and it was called Ring It On, and like couples would play trivia to win an engagement ring at the end. So it was like me and a bunch of Colts players like doing this game show at one of the pizza place from IU with the breadsticks.
Hot Box.
No.
Oh, the one before that.
It doesn't matter. But anyway, so like getting on stage in front of people. And then I got a segment on Fox 59 in that job too. So suddenly I was going on TV, which I now to this day still have a segment on Fox 59, full circle. So
when is that?
Every other Friday, I have a segment called Inspired Living.
What time does it air?
9:10.
9:10 a.m.?
9:10 a.m.
Well,
in the morning
check
show.
that out too.
Well, your living's about to get really inspired.
I love it.
Yeah. So just funny, like totally unrelated, but full circle back on Fox 59. And so I just developed that. And then I don't know that this is a skill, but thick skin.
Yeah.
For sure. If you've ever read the comment section of your local newspaper online.
Or literally any social media.
Or any social media. Yeah. So
one of these days, we'll get
How
to
can
the point where
we
have tools.
convince people to just be less nasty? Is that utopia thought?
Well, I was a big fan of engaging for a while, and I got a couple apologies out of it, right? Because I think what it comes down to, especially back then, I think now we're a little more aware because we've seen the effects of bullying and all sorts of things, but we hadn't talked about that as much then. And it was this recognition that there is a human on the other end. Yeah. And typically when suddenly now I'm like, yeah, let's talk. We should have a conversation about your thoughts. Right. It was like, oh, well,
I didn't want that.
I shouldn't have said that. I didn't know you were going to see it. I didn't know you were going to respond to it. And then after a while I was like, I actually just, but there was quite a period of time where I was like, yeah, I'm willing to set aside some time for this because you need to not do this to other people. And I've always looked at this, and this is probably a coping mechanism, but that things happen to me because I have the resilience. And so not to be like, I'm a superhero, but I think there are things that would possibly break other people or damage them more in the way, and that I feel better prepared to handle them. So it really didn't bother me as much as I know that it probably did other people. And I'd rather me be the one to speak up and like fight that small battle.
Yeah.
If that means that person's not going to go on and do it again.
It's somebody else.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'll go ahead and say that you're a superhero in the way that you handled that. And for us newbies in the room here, which is literally everyone but you, what are your tips or tricks for doing media well?
Well, I don't know that I always follow them. I think I'll tell you what I do forget still. I forget to breathe because I'm a fast talker anyway. I fumble over my words when I get excited or I'm not breathing. I think I have a tendency, and I'm just going to say the things I do wrong, but sometimes I have a tendency, I want to like overshare and it's about the other person. And I'm like, but I want to share my experience with you and make it a two-way conversation. And sometimes, it's one thing in an interview where you can edit that out, but if it's like live and you can't edit it, that you're there to be the moderator or the host, or just recognizing what am I in this situation?
Yeah. Yep.
Is this a conversation, or am I the moderator, or it is my job? Because I see that, I've seen people who are supposed to be there to simply moderate, and then they center themselves at the discussion. Yeah. I think that's a really important one. It's just like recognizing.
Well, let me tell you what I think about it.
I was actually just about to chime in and say, actually, Matt, you do a great job of it. For a guy with a lot to say, he asks really thought-provoking questions. I will give you a little kudos for that, Matt.
Yeah.
Well, and I like what you had to say about, live television, sound bites. Are you there to give sound bites? Or are you there to have a discussion? Or are you there to ask questions?
Yes. And asking that of whoever you're there for, like, what is my role at this event or in this interview? I mean, sometimes it's a very clear understanding. You're a podcast guest. Okay, I understand how that works. But sometimes it's not always clear, like, what it is you want me to do. And it just doesn't hurt to ask a lot of questions beforehand so you can go in prepared.
Having interviewed a lot of people, what do the best guests or people that you're interviewing do with that interview? How do they show up, or what kinds of things do they say that really help you craft a good story?
It's kind of tough to your point about just being authentic. Like, when someone has scripted responses, and that's boring, and nobody wants that. I think and that's also your job as an interviewer, to get people comfortable to want to share. The worst thing you can do as a guest is a one-word answer, right? Yep.
Yes, no, yes.
And sometimes you have to dig a little harder than other times with people, but that's also just like, looking at, it's not like I sat and studied, but I admired, right, like Barbara Walters and Oprah for, like, I'm not going to let that go, actually. Like, I don't accept that answer. Yeah. So let's try that again. And now I want you to give me the real answer. Howard Stern's really good at that too, right? Like, no, actually, or he's, very in your face about it. Like, that's not true. But I think that as the guest, the best thing you can do is just be authentic and honest.
So you go through all these experiences, growing up, going to journalism, like self-starter, self-taught, right? Different major in communications. So how did all of that culminate together that you woke up one day, or was it over a series of days or months or years, that you decided to start Indy Maven?
It was the year after my first son. He's going to be 5 at the end of this month, the end of January. And the year after he was born, which I've actually heard women say that this can be a very creative time. I partly think it's because you're sitting there and you're trapped a lot, especially if you're nursing. I mean, even if you're not, if you're just feeding it, you're stuck holding a sleeping baby, feeding a baby.
A lot of time
it gives you a lot of time to think.
Yeah. And
also maybe you're sleep deprived and it's coming up with crazy ideas. I don't know. I think there's something to be said about that period of time. And then, so what do you want to do, right? You keep them alive for a year. And I was like, okay, if you're going to go back to work, then what do you want that to look like? And I couldn't picture myself going back to any of the places that I had already been. Not because I didn't enjoy it. I wanted a new experience. And so I talked to my friend and mentor and Indy Maven co-founder, Amanda Kingsbury, a lot. And I don't know if somehow she had suggested or I suggested, but what about all these ideas that we had that we were never able to bring to fruition for whatever reason during our time that we worked together at the Star? And we just started mapping out what that could look like, because during that time when I was at the Star, newsletters were really kicking off. And I was like an early adopter of the Skim, if you're familiar with that daily newsletter. And so wouldn't it be cool if we had something like that here, or Daily Candy? There were these newsletters very early on, and thought, well, that would be cool to have here. We already had thought that a couple years ago, but now we had the capacity to maybe try it on our own. So that was the very early kind of version of Indy Maven.
Oh, so originally Indy Maven, you were thinking co-working.
No, the co-working just really came about in the last year. So Indy Maven was designed, well, actually, first and foremost, it was like a directory. So it was a lifestyle directory. I found it so funny that I was sitting home covered in spit up, and I was still getting texts like, where should I go for my anniversary dinner? Where do I get my eyebrows done? And I'm just like, well, why are you asking me?
Where do you get your eyebrows?
It depends which part. Microblading, shaping. I have different people for different things.
Okay, I'm going to backpedal on that question.
But it was like I had this Rolodex of information in my brain because of what I had done professionally, and it felt like a waste, right? Your brain with a baby at home already feels like a little bit mush. I'm like, I need to keep this sharp, and I'm getting rusty, and I don't want to lose touch of what's going on in my city and what I've worked hard to sort of become an expert at. And so was going to be a directory, and it kicked off like that. And then I realized directories are a lot of work, and also not my area, like not my best like skill set. Like the skill set is storytelling. So I can put a listing of where you could go get your eyebrows done, or I could tell you about my experience and here's how it happened and this is what it felt like and here's what you can expect, because that's what people go off of, right? Storytelling. And also like personal recommendation, because you don't necessarily know on a directory listing, right? This is why we have Yelp and things where people can have their personal reviews. And so very quickly it was like, no, it's about the story behind whatever the place, the thing, the topic is. So that became just content, website, free weekly newsletter, comes out every Thursday. We've never missed an issue. And then from there, what happened was it very quickly just evolved to a community, which we knew the community, we had it backwards, like the content was the driver and then the community would come, except now it's sort of flipped on its head where the community is the focus and the content and the storytelling just supports the community.
We have some experience with that.
Yep. I love it.
Our content's not as awesome as yours, but I can totally understand how that would have shifted. But
that means you're onto something, right?
That's
because
right.
if people are willing to build a community around something,
100%. Yeah.
Then that means they're interested.
It's like, especially the organic nature.
Yeah.
Right. It sounds like how it came about.
Yes.
So then how'd that parlay into the physical space?
So launched 2019. COVID, 5 months later, first summer, asking the audience, this community, right, that already existed, what do you want this to be? Because we were supposed to do a lot of events and we couldn't. And so what would you like instead? Or, we were super quick to jump on the virtual event thing, but also knew that was going to only last so long. So just trying to think ahead. And even though we were doing those, I was still thinking, okay, but when the time comes, what's going to be the event that we do? What's going to be the in-person thing? And the answer just from the women was always like, I want to be with other women and support other women, connect with other women. And I mean, ultimately, we're a social species, and that is we gather, right? And so knowing that gathering, and we'd already planned to have these monthly meetups, but it's hard to find a new place every month. So like, wouldn't it be nice if we just had one place? And then during that time, because I was always paying attention to media, but specifically like women's media, seeing all of the other spaces like this for women that were popping up around the country and just thinking, well, we're like a good sized city. We should probably have one of these too. And then it was one of those things where I thought, would it bother me if somebody else did this? And the answer was definitely yes. And so I kind of wanted to jump on it before someone else did. And it happened really quickly after that.
So is it powered by individual memberships or company memberships or both?
All of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah. So we have everything from day passes, so you can just pop in for the day, monthly memberships, there's corporate memberships, we have corporate sponsors. Our members are everything from solopreneurs, small teams, their company pays for it, they're nonprofits. So there's a lot of different people in there, but all sort of with that same mission of uplifting women. You don't have to be a woman, but you need to have, that mission at heart first and foremost. And so we have about 40 members now. The goal, like I say, sort of comfortable goal is about 100, but I want to also see how that feels. We have a big space, and I have yet to really find how people will behave. And it's funny, you can talk, I'm in a co-working community, and one place in one city will say, oh my gosh, Mondays are so dead for us. And then the next space, like, that's our busiest days. Mm-hmm. So still seeing how people behave from an attendance standpoint, I guess. Still figuring that out, and then kind of decide there where we cap it.
Can you tell us about your space? Kind of give us the pitch on why did a listener want to come and become a member?
Yeah, so we have 15,000 square feet, and we are downtown Indianapolis. We've got really easy surface parking. It's easy to get to. It's at the corner of Michigan and Capitol. So we sublease from Salesforce. So it was a very well done space to begin with. And it was designed as an amenity space. So that's really our strength. Our strength is our amenities and our community. The people who are there on a regular basis, again, it sounds so cheesy because see magic happen all the time. Collaborations, friendships, business interactions. It's really, really cool to see, which I had already seen, right? But anecdotally or through hearing things or seeing things at our events. But now I get to see it at a daily basis. So definitely that community element is the strength. And then just from the amenities standpoint, we have an on-site cafe for our members. That Fork and Function is another local women-owned business. They operate that. We've got an event space, so we can rent out the whole space. We can fit 300 people. But then we also have a specific event room that can be up to, 150, 180, depending on what you want to do with it, that has all the AV, the projectors, the mics. So it's a great multi-use room. We have a full gym on site. We have sparkling water. That's always a big hit. But, the number one thing that we get, the comment is just the natural light. The biggest thing people comment on is just the amount of natural light that we have. It's super open and airy. We've got a lot of plants. It just feels really good in there.
I love that. So you keep talking about this word community, right? You've used it a few times about this great community and this aspect there. Can you tell me the characteristics of a good community and kind of define that for the listeners of what makes a strong community?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I have researched that over the last, not purposefully, but I like nerd out on topics, right? So if I get into something and I want to know more about it, so I've listened to like 3 books recently on that very subject, because I got annoyed hearing people use that word a lot and not really understanding what it meant. And there's a book called The Art of Gathering, I believe is the one, right? And okay, I loved the definitions that they use, right? And so you can have a group of people that still gather, but it doesn't mean that it's a community, right? So to me, and for what our community is, it's a group of people who will, and this might be different from the book, but for us, it's a group of people who want to be together, right? Whether that is virtually or in person, and they share common goals and they are gathering for a purpose. And that can be a very broad purpose. So for us, it's just uplifting women. And then from there, they might have their own reasons. Well, I'm also here to network for my business, or I want to make more friends, right? But when I say community, it's this group that formed out of these women who said, and it wasn't just women, we certainly had all types of people, but majority of female identifying people coming forward and saying, like, I think that there is a need for something like this to exist, and therefore I want to show up in whatever way is asked or I feel comfortable so that I can make this happen and support this and keep it going, get bigger, include more people, and have an impact, have this desired impact.
As someone who's hosted a lot of events now, or at least led a company that has hosted a lot of events, what kind of tips do you have for people on how to host a great gathering, whether that's corporate function, board meeting, or a dinner at home, or a big conference, anywhere in between? What are those things that you've kind of seen, both as a connoisseur of events? Mm-hmm. I'm sure you attended a lot of events while covering lots of different events, but then now hosting your own events.
I think we hear certainly in the marketing world about surprise and delighting people. And I think that often does not translate over to events or meetings or reasons why we gather. And I think, I'll see brands like, well, we want to surprise and delight our customer. But then their team is sitting in this room and it has this terribly boring meeting, right? And like, you can get into culture and all that, but it's like, it has to be across the board. So for us, we have in the past once or twice tried a meetup where there was just like let's just hang out, let's just get to know each other, and let's leave it open ended, and those fall flat. Has to be some sort of an interaction or an engagement initiative. Like, I need to show up and know what it is that I am doing, and that could be, we've done food and wine tastings this last month, or just like this. I guess it was this month, a panel of women in the media just sitting and listening to discussion, and the attendees came up to me after and just were like, that was one of the best ever. And it's because, back to your earlier point, that they were so honest and so vulnerable and shared things that you just don't get to hear your evening news anchor talk about on their personal life. And it was really well received. Now, in that case, people showed up, they mingled, they had their social time, they had a drink, they had a bite to eat, and then they went in and they spent a full hour and 20 minutes just glued to this conversation. So I don't, it can vary what it is, but I think you have to kind of back to the art of gathering, like, why are we meeting? What can I expect? What's my right? We're all children. We're all kindergartners, and we just want to know what is expected of us, and then also have room for creativity.
Yeah.
I love what you just said about the reaction of people. The word vulnerable, like being vulnerable in discussions, right? And then the flip side of listening to people who are vulnerable. I mean, just a whole different level of connection, right? It's just amazing.
I think it's one of the few things you can't fake.
Right.
Because you can fake authenticity.
Yeah.
Like, that's the whole internet, right? That's majority of influencers out there. It's really hard to fake vulnerability.
Yeah.
And when you do, people see through it a lot easier.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that especially over the last couple of years, my mindset on like vulnerability has totally shifted, right? Because now when I see people that are willing to be vulnerable and talk about their story and the hard parts, I now associate it to strength.
Yes.
Whereas maybe 5 years ago, I was like, oh, vulnerable, synonym to weak. But now it's just like totally like, especially just like hearing people like go out there and talk about the things that are hard and the things that they've struggled with. It's like, now I'm like, wow, you're so strong for doing that. And like, I really believe that. And it's an awesome way to connect with people.
Well, it creates a bond, right? Because we all have experiences that are good and experiences that are bad. But the power of the bonding, like the human to human bond, I know we're getting to the end, but I almost get too deep in a hole here, and then I get a little emotional because like all these, like when I listen to your story, I thought about 100 things that I haven't thought about in a while, right? That's the power, is like there's almost like a built-in healing mechanism, you know, when you listen to other stories.
Well, it's a perfect segue for the last question I want to ask before the lightning round, which is sharing your challenges is what I think makes a story interesting, but I'm not a professional storyteller. And so one question I wanted to make sure I asked you, Leslie, is how do you tell a good story?
I'm going to be annoyed at my own answer here, but it is, well, two things. It's one, it's what we grew up being taught. Sometimes we overthink things. Like there's the beginning, the middle, and the end, right? And you have to have all of those things. I was very guilty very early on, and I still am, like burying the lead, as we say, right? So moving, I will very often in my writing practice start, and then about 3 paragraphs in, delete everything before that, and that's what you actually want to start with. And then my annoyed part, just because it's so Donald Miller in the building a story brand, like the hero's journey. There's a reason that is as popular as it is, right? I mean, it works. There's a formula or the solution. So it's kind of not overthinking. We can apply the hero's journey, and we can apply the beginning and the middle and the end, and we can apply these things, and that is what makes a good story. But then I think it's also the human part of it and the nuance part of it, because you can report all the facts. And I think that's where I got a little bit, I don't want to be that kind of journalist. And not that facts aren't important, they are, but I also wanted to include the human part of it, right? And which again, you can read like a really great crime reporter, that's what they're going to get into. Or even like Dana Benbow, she's a sports reporter, sports writer, but her stories have more humanity than half the things you'll read. It's what is appealing to the human nature in the story.
There are so many good insights there that I could probably ask 10 more questions each on, but I want to save time for the lightning round because I'm very curious to hear what your answers are.
We're pumped about that. I do want to close out with, speaking of sharing these stories, could you share a quick story or two about what's going on with Indy Maven and some of the success stories that has come out of this community that you've built?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I can officially
triumphant
say.
on top of the mountain at the end of the journey.
Yeah. So this week, honestly, has been really crucial in bringing some conversations, right, that happened at the end of last year. But number one is that I started these as 2 separate companies. Like from a liability standpoint, I thought, okay, on paper, these should be different. I think I got in my head that they had to be so different that I presented them in the market as so separate, and then realizing, well, now I know how strong the Indy Maven brand is and the Maven brand in general, because I can't fight that. I thought I could just make it very clear. These are different. Here's what you get over in this one, and here's what you get over in this one. And I can tell somebody that, and they're like, yes, but how can we make them the same? right? And so it's having to listen to your customer and go, okay, I'm going to be done fighting this. I can send out as many explainer emails till I'm blue in the face. And in the end, they're like, but could we combine them? And so I've heard that. And so this year is all about putting the experience together, that you're not just the Indy Maven member, you're not just the Maven Space member, right? That you're going to enter at different points in that journey, but it is all one thing as far as, you know, the public is concerned. But through that, I am able to elevate our partnership. So we had a great partnership last year with Indy Chamber, and now this year we've put together a package that is even bigger and better, and it involves in-person events and the storytelling. And so we are, the rest I won't say because like ink drying, but this week specifically 4 really large partnerships with brands that I really respect in the community. I'm excited because I think they could also use some shaking up, that we can also benefit from what they know. But that's one example of how we're going to bring the parts of this business together to then be able to serve our greater community by partnering with some of these other organizations and brands. So that's my big focus.
I love it.
How can someone get involved?
So the lowest entry, easiest point is signing up for our newsletter. Like I said, it's free. It comes out every Thursday. It was 8 a.m., but I had this epiphany the other day. When do I check my email? Not 8 a.m., at 6 a.m. So last week was our first week being at 6.
6 a.m.
I've had 2 kids under 5. But generally speaking, right, if most people check their email as soon as they wake up in the morning, which is typically between 6 and 8, right? Not starting at 8. So that was like a little tweak, we made. So I'm going to watch and see how that performs. But so free weekly newsletter. You can join as an Indy Maven member starting at $10 a month, all the way up to Maven Space membership that we have for teams, which is up to 5 people for $295 a month. And then there are all the different kind of the things in between. If you're a corporate sponsor, we're also doing sponsored memberships this year, which I'm really excited about because wanting to provide access, like in the past, a lot of spaces like this have been really exclusive, like around the country have been really exclusive and not accessible. And so through these sponsored memberships, we're able to keep our lights on, but also invite other people from the community to join who might not otherwise be there. So that's another thing I'm really excited about. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get involved.
Very cool. And we'll link it all up in the show notes for those that want links to that.
Absolutely. All right.
Ready for the lightning round?
It's time. Leslie, the lightning round. Now, authentic, quick, off the top of your head answers, all right?
Okay.
Here we go. Outside of the amazing entrepreneurs, what is Indiana known for?
Sports.
Remember that time you said not to have your guests give one-word answers? Let's go deeper than that.
Well, so this could also be influenced. My knowledge of Indiana before I lived here was racing the Indy 500 because that's what I knew. So, and I found that when you travel, people go, "Oh, like the Indy 500, like Mario Andretti."
Ties to racing. I love it. All right. What is a hidden gem in Indiana?
I have 2: Asia Coffee Cakes and Filigree Bakery. I don't know why, maybe February, my son's birthday, Asia Coffee Cakes has made 2 or 3 of my son's birthday cakes, and they are amazing. She had Paddington Bear last year and a Minion before that. So we've linked to her. Her cakes are incredible and delicious. And Filigree Bakery, we just recently connected. She does cakes as well, but also beautiful macarons. And I saw those on her Instagram right before I came here. And I don't think a lot of people know about them, but for this season,
I didn't know about either of
year
those.
round, but both women owned and really talented bakers.
I love that. Okay.
Final question.
Yes. Who is someone that we need to keep on our radar? Someone who's doing big things.
Stacia Murphy at Indy Chamber. Not to keep talking about them, but also topic of mind. But she and I got to know each other during COVID, and I just think we were so lucky to have her.
What's her magic?
She is she is in it, right? She knows she has a perspective that she brings to the table that I don't think, and she is an example, right, of people who are going into establishments that already exist and sort of saying like, okay, but also right? And I think there are so many women doing this, and we do an annual like women to watch story, so you can look at that coming out, and we'll have a whole list of them. Yeah. But she's somebody who, top of mind, I recently communicated with, that I think she has just gotten a promotion, and I won't even attempt to say what the title is because I'm sure I'll get it wrong. But she's doing really big things as far as like DEI and in their business initiatives, and I think will really make an impact and have an impact on a lot of people through her job.
I love it.
Through her role.
Maybe we can get her on the show.
Maybe we can.
Yep.
I do have one final question. I know we're done with the lightning round, but final question. You had throughout your career, throughout your life, a lot of strings pulling you back to Michigan, pulling you back to family. I'd love to know, as we close out, what kept you coming back to Indiana and Indianapolis specifically?
Well, it was free. So my dad had a condo here, and he was like, hey, you can live here, because he would go back to Michigan on the weekends, and I would have this sick condo right on Mass Ave to myself all week. So that really played a big role in it. But what kept me here and not leaving was every year, like, I would see how Mass Ave was changing, and I'd see different businesses, and I just every year was like, I gotta stick around and see what happens. I feel like I need to see where this is going, and I'm glad I did, because using Mass Ave as an example, like, you don't even recognize it, better or worse, but I got to see what came of that, because when I moved there, it was me and the Mass Ave video guy, Rick, and his cats, and they were my only friends, and, now look at it.
Well, we're glad you're here too. Thank you for everything that you do to make Indianapolis awesome, and everything that you have done to make Indianapolis awesome. And thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's
You guys
amazing,
are fun.
Leslie. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
This has been Get In, a Powder Keg production in partnership with Elevate Ventures. And we want to hear from you. If you have suggestions for a guest or segment, reach out to Matt or Nate on LinkedIn or on email. To discover top-tier tech companies outside of Silicon Valley in hubs like Indiana, check out our newsletter at powderkeg.com/newsletter. And to apply for membership to the Powder Keg executive community, check out powderkeg.com/premium. We'll catch you next time and next week as we continue to help the world get in. Since you just listened to this podcast, you might be thinking about starting one for your company. Lucky for you, our partners over at Casted have you covered. Casted is the first and only podcast and video marketing platform made specifically for B2B brands. I love this about them. The platform makes it possible to publish, syndicate, amplify, and measure the value of your podcast and video content. In fact, we use it for our podcast here at Powder Keg. And if you're a startup, you should listen up, because Casted for Startups is definitely for you. They are offering exclusive deep discounts of up to 82% off retail price for qualifying startups. Connect with Casted at casted.us/powderkeg.